I'm Vin.
I'm Sori.
And this is
Thrice.
Thrice.
The Gray.
The Gray. Thrice fans are pretty.
I know. They're.
You remember when we first started out? Was the Avenged Sevenfold fans?
Yeah.
Yeah. The Thrice fans are serious.
But we weren't doing requests at that time like this.
This is the Gray.
I don't know how serious. These people are more serious, I think.
For sure.
Yeah. So this is for Benjamin. I don't know. Every time I see the name Benjamin, I always want to say Benji.
Benjamin.
But you never know if that's insulting. So
This is probably Ben Webb's like alter ego.
why do you make it always about Ben Webb? This is about Benjamin, not Ben Webb.
How do we know it's not Benjamin Webb?
Ben Webb is too cheap.
For timely, topical, political commentary, you can hit us up at Middle America with Vin and Sori. There are multiple ways to get your song reviewed. Dare listen to my favorite ways. The community option, $1 at the gate, gets you in at Patreon, where you will meet the amazing Lee of the Village, Pony of the Village, the mighty Ian, the amazing Helen Dross. These alliance leaders, they will bring you into their Borg, and then you can pool your points together, and then boom, you can select a song with your teammates. On top of that, we've got a $5 tier where you can hear the first 40 seconds of the song that we're working on in our band. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, your brother and sister are in a band. You should come check us out if we ever finish that song. And then at the $10 tier, myself and Sarcast are working on an instrumental that you'll be able to have access to before everybody, like a month before everybody else, that I'm working on for the baby. It's like a little tradition. Every time Sori gets pregnant, I do a little instrumental. So the first one was like 20 seconds. This one's a little bit more involved. But, so you get all that stuff at the Patreon levels. There's a shirt level, there's a mug level, there's all that jazz. Now, if you're a filthy capitalist like Sori and you don't want to work in a team with a community of people, you can simply do what this guy did. $125 at the gate gets you straight to the head of the line, and you get to determine for yourself what song we listen to. And that's why we're listening to Thrice the Gray. Let's go. What are you smiling at? Get your headphones on. Let's go.
Somebody said they were really angry that we do these requests, and they said that you've been our filthy capitalist because you participate and allow the option to even be there. Anyway,
this is the Gray from the band Thrice.
So let's do this.
Let's rock and roll.
breathe. I can finally breathe. And my hands are up and reaching out, learning how to live without, learning how to lean into the grave. 'Cause I've had enough of black and white, find another way and I will lean into the grave. I lean into the grave. Yeah, I've had enough of black and white. I lean into the grave. I lean into the grave. I'll find another way and die. Lean into the grave. I lean into the grave.
Oh, Kelsey, it feels so good. Well, I certainly hope they made it.
I'm sure they would.
That video was
Reminds
super
me of your Bible
stressful.
college. Reminds me of your Bible college.
The being trapped inside that place.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it reminds me of a lot of my entire life.
What do you mean?
I think I've always felt trapped, except for now, but now I'm a mom, so it kind of has a trap feeling as well.
Okay. What'd you think the song was about?
Honestly, I didn't even look at the lyrics because I feel really hot right now. Not because of the room, but that video was very stressful. I do not like people being trapped into things, and I don't like people being tied to tables and forcing things in their mouths and stuff. And then I saw that thing you posted. I couldn't even watch it or read. I just skipped roll right past it. I saw a little bit of it, and I said, "Oh my lord!"
I posted
That
something.
black man that was strapped to that table.
Oh, yeah.
So I can't.
So you get claustrophobic.
Yeah, extremely claustrophobic, and plus I think I'm already just having one of those days where I'm like, ugh.
What? Like prego emotional days? Yeah. oh, that's all right. There you go. I think this song is about like, I don't know if maturing is the word, but getting to a place with your spirituality where things are not either or. So like, gray areas or whatever, right? He says, I've had enough of black and white.
Oh.
Right? Mm-hmm. I'll find another way. I'll lean into the gray. I'll lean into the gray. So I think the whole, when I mistook the language for the light, I'm assuming is, the balance that you have to strike as a Christian between saying the Bible is the Word of God, but the Bible is not God. Mm-hmm. God is God. And the distinction between the Word of God and the actual person of God obviously gets harmonized in the person of Jesus, because he is called the Word, but it's also a person. And so, people talk about the Christ hermeneutic, where you read the rest of the Bible through the lens of Jesus, because he's the lived Word of God. So, in the early, around 2006, 2007, you had the whole emergent church movement, which was basically guys were coming out of postmodernism and different theories on the truth, or different theories on our apprehension of the truth. And so, Rob Bell was probably like the biggest, emergent church guy. and everybody in the reform camp was obviously against those folks and yada yada, which including me. I was a massive anti-emergent guy. So obviously, you know, as you grow, you begin to see, like, one of the biggest things for me was when you mention slavery and how these Puritans, they're held as these like paragons of virtue. They own slaves. And it's clear from the New Testament, you know, Paul says in 1 Timothy 1 that people who engage in the slave trade are tantamount to people who murder their parents and people who do X, Y, and Z, and whatever else is contrary to sound doctrine. He calls them unholy and profane. I mean, he classes them with murderers and all the other things, like people. But, you know, the Puritans are held up as these paragons of virtue.
Yep.
And then when you tell them about it, they go, yeah, but, you know, they were imperfect men. They were people of their time. And the other thing is, you know, James talks about God judging those who withhold the wages from the laborer, which by default means that slavery as an institution de facto is something that's under the wrath of God. And yet they're able to look past that and say there are other aspects of this person that makes him a good person that you should emulate. So then when you talk about your LGBT friends, they don't give them that same, they don't say, oh, well, you know, they're people of their time, and so the seats in Laban was that, you know, LGBT was cool, so let's look past that one thing and look at the rest of their, you know, their track record and look at them as somebody to be emulated. And you know, so it's very, very black and white here. And then when you talk about the Puritans, they go, well, stuff's not that simple. Yeah, it's not that simple.
Yep.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree. I have more doubts about the salvation of Jonathan Edwards than I do of some of my gay friends. So it's like, it's stuff like that.
So many Christians would flip if they hear you say
Well,
that.
I got in a crazy conversation with one of these, you know, these reformed people who were supposedly, you know, they just go by the Bible or whatever. I'm like, okay, so he's in hell because, you know, greed, which is idolatry, which is the main driver for slave labor. You know, the passage in James, this passage here, like, so he's in hell then because he was an unrepentant. And then it says neither thieves. It says neither thieves nor the greedy. You know, 1 Corinthians 6, it has the vice list, and obviously, you know, arsenic coites, men who practice homosexuality, is on the list. So I said, okay, all right, all my gay friends are in hell. So all your Puritan heroes, because that's greed. That's thievery also, because and it specifically says that slave labor is trafficking in the bodies and souls of men in the book of Revelation, talking about the fall of Babylon. It talks about, you know, they trafficked in cinnamon, da-da-da-da, and then it says, and human souls, that is the bodies and souls of men. So I'm like, all right, cool. So all my gay friends are in hell, so all your Puritan heroes. And oh, that's ridiculous. Why?
Right.
Like, why? Why are you able to go, well, I'm not really sure here on this one, and you gotta understand they're people of their time, and you can't just indict them, their entire character, because they made one little mistake. And
little mistake.
Of course, it's absolutely insulting as a descendant of slave, but at the same time, I go, okay, I'll give you that, and then you give me my gay friends, we'll be okay. You can't have it, you can't have both ways. You see what I'm saying?
Well, and the
you
other
can't do
thing
that.
too is that, like, I'm speaking in generalizations here, but when you look at slavery, and like you said, behind it, there was the greed, there was the thievery, there was the supremacy, not treating people as image bearers of God.
Correct.
Like, there's so many sins behind that one sin of slavery.
And then the generational ramifications post-emancipation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then you have, you know, homosexuality, and a lot of times behind that is they've suffered abuse. Not all cases. Again, I'm speaking in generalizations. You know, a lot of, you know, I know personally some of them, they're in very loving relationships, and they chose those relationships because they love the other person. So it's like at the base of it, it's you have love, or you might have had abuse, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, but the base of slavery is thievery, greed, you know what I'm saying?
There's nothing redemptive about it whatsoever.
So, right.
There's nothing redemptive about it where you could say, okay, the Bible as a whole says X, but within that, love is still a beautiful thing. Adopting kids, you know, a lot of these LGBT people are put in a situation where they pretty much adoption's their only option. And so there's a lot of good that but I've never once ever compromised the Bible on that topic. I never once have ever. I never will. But you're right. Like, the institution of slavery has way more deleterious effects on the soul of the enslaved and the enslaver.
Yeah.
And Paul explicitly wrote to Philemon and said, take back Onesimus, not as a slave, but as a brother.
Yep.
And then Paul says, you owe me your life. He basically says, now I'm not going to force you to set Onesimus free, but don't forget you owe me your very life. But I'm not going to bring that up. Paul was funny. It's insane. So, like, on that perspective, like, I commiserate with the song a lot, because it's like, here we go. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But on the other hand, I think that so I have a lot of sympathy for the emergent church now. I mean, the movement is pretty much done. All the major players, Doug Pagitt, the rest of those guys, like, they're all, And it was something that was impossible to last, just because of they rooted in postmodernism, which it's impossible for that to coincide with Christianity. So I knew it was going to, give it about 5 years, and that's pretty much, Rob Bell wrote "Love Wins," and that was it. Like, he was dead after that. And so, like, when I look at obviously my model is Jesus, and there were times when he looked at the gray area for things. So, for example, he'd talk about the woman caught in adultery or whatever, that very early Christian tradition of woman caught in adultery, and he found a way to get her off, basically, and or the rendering taxes to Caesar.
Yep.
That was a major cultural problem, right? Because the Romans were this pagan occupying force that were going towards the concept of emperor worship and things like that, and they were occupying the Holy Land, and they were defiling the Holy Land and all this. You had pilots setting up, Roman eagles and all this around the temple complex, which is massively a blasphemous thing. And so there was this entire discussion about, okay, what do you do if you're in a situation where you're paying taxes to fund this war machine? And a lot of people at the time were like, this is cut and dry, you should never do it, because you're giving financial aid and comfort to the enemy. And so they bring Jesus in this situation because they're trying to trap him, because if Jesus says don't pay your taxes, then they're going to go right to Pilate and say this
guy's inciting people not to pay taxes.
Right. But if he says pay your taxes, then they're going to go to the Jews and say this guy's not a patriot. How can he be the Messiah? He's supposed to liberate us from Roman oppression.
Right.
And Jesus begins by saying, whose image is on the coin? And they say Caesar's. And Jesus says, okay, render to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what belongs to God. Which is a very third way, middle row type of way to address the issue, because the question, whose image is on the coin, is massive, because basically what he's saying is anything that bears the image of Caesar belongs to him anyway. But you don't bear the image of Caesar, you bear the image of God. So give Caesar his little pennies or whatever, but give God your whole soul, your whole being. And that's a massively important discussion, because our tax dollars are going to fund the abortions and wars overseas where we kill people and et cetera, and we've got to render to Caesar because it's their money anyway. So, but we give ourselves heart and soul to God. So on the one hand, I'm like, yeah, that part of maturity is growing up and seeing that things aren't black and white. However, part of maturity is also knowing when to look at things as black and white. Because things get extremely dangerous when certain things get compromised, right?
Yeah, no, it's true.
So, I talk about this all the time. Like, in the antebellum slave trade, people were like, well, are blacks human beings? It's not that simple as just saying we're going to liberate these slaves. You know, if you look at the abolitionist discussions during the transatlantic slave trade, where you had this small group of people saying, we need to abolish this, this is a horrible evil, this is terrible, what the hell is wrong with you people? And the court, you know, sometimes the response would be, shut up, you stupid liberal, blah, 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 you know. But some people in the middle, in the mediating middle, would say, well, it's not that simple, because, okay, let's say we emancipate the slaves. What's gonna happen to those slaves?
Yeah.
Who's gonna hire them for a job? Who's gonna hire them for work? And then what's gonna happen to your poor plantation neighbor whose entire P&L, you know, their business is structured around the assumption of a certain type of production and a certain degree of wages, which is not. You know, all they had to do was upkeep. And so the mediating, the guys in the middle that were perceived themselves to be these rational, thinking people that were like, things aren't as simple as emancipation or slavery. There's a middle road. Like, now we look back at them and go, no, we should have freed those slaves. Like, period.
What did we do? I mean,
What do you mean?
what did we do in that situation? I actually wasn't thinking about what happened. Like, when the slaves were freed, where did they go? What did they do? What happened to the plantations that had been relying on them?
Yeah, plantations basically went to hell, and that's when we had the Reconstruction, you know, project where you had a bunch of money was paid. Actually, slave owners got reparations for the loss of income.
Wow.
And you know.
And then what happened to the slaves? What did they do?
I mean, then you had the 13th Amendment, and then you had you had those patrols, and then those brothers ended up in prison, and you know, it was a very long road to hope. You know, like you definitely didn't get the 40 acres and a mule nonsense. Like, that didn't happen, right? But nobody looks back at that and says, yeah, those middle ground people had a point. Nobody does that. Mm-hmm. Everybody, well, you know, I'm sure there's probably some people in Alabama, Mississippi, maybe.
Well,
but my point is, like, there are some issues where having a mediating position is still evil. Mm-hmm. There are some issues where to try to muck things up and turn them gray is still evil. Like, I forgot what country it was, but they've just turned the age of consent down to 15.
Well, your conversation just 2 days ago.
Yeah. And then there was that TED Talk that everybody's freaking out about, where somebody said that it's called minor attracted persons or whatever. It's a sexual orientation, yada yada yada. And I don't think this person was promoting, like, hey, these are good, healthy relationships. She was just saying it's a sexual orientation. But obviously, people are like, yo, we know where this is going. And so if 5 years from now, people go, hey, that's my orientation, and a 7-year-old and a 45-year-old.
When you say orientation, that makes it sound like it's something that's normal. I feel like that it needs to be categorized as
no, orientation doesn't mean that it's normal. It just means that it's uncontrollable, which I agree with. Now, what you do with that data is the issue, and how you know, to your point, it should be, okay, well, then you have a disorder orientation that you need help with. But we're, as a society, you're not going to come around you and then say, oh yeah, you're a minor attracted person, so, you know, if you want to get with a 5-year-old or you see what I'm saying? Like, that cannot, there's certain situations where having that's great is bad, is very, very evil. So there's certain things that are absolutely black and white that you need to hold the line on and say, nope, we're not doing that as an entire category of experience. Like, that's not going to happen. So I get the meaning of the song as far as, like, I think there are a lot more things that are gray than they are black and white. But there are a few things that have to be black and white. Like, anything that harms children, like, you know, you're trafficking little girls, like, I'm not going to look for a gray area, right? Like, things like slavery, like, there's no gray area there. Like, it's just, as a category, completely wrong and irredeemable. So that's kind of like the back and forth as how I'm relating to the song, right? Like, I get it, and I think that in, you know, there are not a lot of like for example in the Bible, like there's not a lot of instructions on how to run a church service. There are principles, but and the reason for that is actually pretty brilliant, and it's why Christianity, emerged as one of the most numerous people in the world as far as religion goes, is because it could adapt to cultures.
Right.
And if you had this very stringent, this is how church is supposed to be done, then it would limit certain things. Like so, like for example, if you're in an Islamic context, it doesn't matter where you are on the planet, you're saying some Arabic because it's rooted in Arabic. Christianity is not rooted in any language.
Yeah.
There is no, on a technical level in the Bible, any sacred language. Now obviously
That's because it dates back to before culture.
Well, that's what we would say. But I mean, even Judaism was very, Old Testament was very culture bound, very linguistically bound, and things like that. And then if you wanted to be part of the people of God, you had to conform to Israelite customs, etc., etc. But what's happened in the New Testament is you don't have to conform to any of that stuff. You only have to follow large chunks of the Old Testament law that mark Judaism, and you would expect that a church service in Africa is going to be different in the 20th century is going to be different from a church service in Latvia in the 15th century, and different from the first century Roman church, and so that creates a lot of gray because you have certain people who are very expressive and demonstrative, like black culture is very expressive and demonstrative, and then you have other people that have understandings of propriety and things like that, but proper, orderly, and they would look at the expressions of the African church as blasphemous, and then the African church would look at their service as being a dead church. You know what I mean? So So there's a lot of room for gray areas in a lot of aspects in especially as a New Testament person. And Paul talked about this where people wanted to worship on a specific day, and he's like, well, if you like that day, go for it. The other guy likes that day, leave him alone. One guy was a vegan. That happened. Like you had vegetarians, vegans in the church, and they were saying, and Paul says, oh, hey, one person wants to eat, and the other person wants. You're good. Just coexist with each other. And so there's a lot in the New Testament about that gray area, and there's some really complicated things like food sacrifice to idols. And Paul goes, look, the food sacrifice to idols was at a discount price. So Paul's like, hey, if I want to buy a discount sandwich, I'm going to get a discount sandwich. Now, if you come in front of me and say this was dedicated to Jupiter, then obviously I can't eat it. Yeah, but that's not because I think anything bad's going to happen to me. Paul says, I know that an idol is nothing. I'm doing it for you. So, and then you talk about to the Jews that became a Jew, to the Greeks that became a Greek. So there's a ton of room in the New Testament for gray areas. And then there are other points of theology and doctrine and practice where there is no gray area. Free Onesimus. Don't hold your brother as a slave. What the hell is wrong with you? Don't hold back the wages from the worker, because God's going to show up and kill you and your old family, which James basically says, which is essentially what happened 30 years later. No sexual assault. So there's things that and that's real maturity. Real maturity, because a lot of people think real maturity is about going from black and white to gray. Real maturity is knowing when something should be gray and when something is black and white. Yeah. That is real maturity.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of, the college that I went to, my upbringing, it was very, very, very black and white. And then a lot of my friends that I have from college, it was a Bible college, they have either gone completely black or completely white, you know what I mean? They've stayed on one end of the spectrum, and if they went into gray, it wasn't it. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Maturity is knowing when to do, because you can't just be gray all the time,
No,
and you can see they're not.
If you're gray all the time, people end up dead. Yeah. And if you're black and white all the time, people end up dead. Yep. So it's very
That's
important.
true.
It's very, very important. What did you get the song?
I liked it. I hated the video.
Really?
Yeah, it was stressful to me. 9.3.
It's a 8.6 for me. There you go. 8.6. Thought-provoking song for sure. Vin out.
Sori out.
Gone.
Could do everything. breathe.